What's up guys, it's CG here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're profiling WITCHCRAFTERs, one of the decks that got new support in Magnificent Mavens, and this is one of those decks that not a lot of people pay attention to it because it's very roguish, but I feel like it's one of the most fun decks that I've played recently, considering the new cards that we got, not only in Magnificent Mavens, but we also got a really good new card recently that you can put in the deck that has a lot of synergy with it, so the deck got a huge boost, and it's one of those decks that can really catch you off guard if you're not prepared for it, because the advantage that it gets is absolutely ridiculous. If this deck gets going, it can easily get basically 6 cards from its graveyard every single turn back while having interruptions on the field. So yeah, it's really fun, it can be really good, and it's one of the most beautiful decks that you've seen because of all the different arts, and it's very, very colorful. So before we begin with the profile, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So let's start with the boss monsters in the main deck. We have one copy of WITCHCRAFTER Madame Vere. Now you only need to play one copy of the boss monsters. You have ways to get them back from the graveyard every single turn, ways that can also recycle themselves, so unless these cards get banished, there's no way you're going to miss them. But now, because of the new card we got in the extra deck, even if your opponent uses cards like DD Crow on the boss monsters, you still have other ways to press for damage, so you don't really need to play multiple copies in order to not brick on them. And Vera is one of the monsters that you won't have on the field pretty much always. She's the card that gates every monster your opponent currently has on the field and boosts all your spellcasters for the amount of spells you have in the grave in your hand, different names. And all these monsters are very easy to get on the field because of the effects of the smaller monsters, where we're going to talk about them a little bit later. We have one copy of Heine. Heine is the Dryden of the deck. You pitch a spell to pop a face-up card. She's also a card that protects your WITCHCRAFTER monsters because your opponent can target only her with card effects, and this means that you can potentially play a second copy of this card to make a lock that your opponent will not be able to target anything. But again, I don't feel like it's worth it to play the second brick that you have in the deck in order to make this lock, because if you play 2 copies and you draw her, there's only one way to get her out of the hand if you draw her, so you don't really have a consistent way of summoning her if you draw this copy and it's going to be a dead card. Being able to fuse it away for the new card is decent, but I still think like this target lock is not really worth playing 2 copies of this card. One is perfectly fine. Again, you can summon her from the graveyard as quickly as you can with all the cards you have in the deck, so it's very easy to get access to both Vere and Heine and getting both interruptions on the board. We have one copy of WITCHCRAFTER Golem Aruru. This is a card that protects you from attacks or targeting effects because it makes your opponent play a little bit weirdly when they know that you have this card in your hand, because when they attack or target a spellcaster monster with an effect, you can basically summon this card and then target a card your opponent controls or a WITCHCRAFTER spell in your grave, and you return them to the hand and you special summon this card, and this card during your opponent's standby phase, it always comes back to your hand, so you're going to keep using this effect over and over again. So it's a 2800 beater that keeps summoning itself. It gives you back advantage or disrupts your opponent whenever your opponent tries to deal with your monsters, so when your opponent knows this card is in your hand, they're going to adjust their plays so you don't get access to this card very freely, so it makes your opponent try to play around all your monsters. Now for the smaller monsters, we play 3 copies of Smita. This card is the most important of the small monsters because by banishing her from the graveyard, get access to any of your spells by milling it, and then you get it back to the hand during the end phase. The small monsters all share the same effect that during the main phase as a quick effect. Tribute them, you pitch a spell, and then you special summon a WITCHCRAFTER from your deck with a different name. As long as you have more spells to discard, it's a good thing to cycle through all of them and then get to your boss monster last, so you get access to all of these spells back, but also getting the graveyard effects, and then you get to a disruption either being Heine or Vere. We play 2 copies of Pyroresh. Her grave effect is that you can banish her to draw a card and then pitch a WITCHCRAFTER card. We do play Prosperity in the deck, so there will be some scenarios where you won't be able to activate this card, so this is why I'm not maxing it out. I feel like Smita is the only small WITCHCRAFTER that you actually need to max out because of her good effect, always be able to use, but Pitora is really good, especially if you don't have Prosperity in hand. And we play 2 copies of Jenny. Jenny is more clutch, but her effect comes up more during the mid game and the late game because you can banish her along with the WITCHCRAFTER spell card, and you get to copy the effect of the spell card that banished. So if you have a spell in the grave that you were not able to get back in your hand during previous turn because you activated its actual effect, maybe you need to copy its effect during the next turn, and this is why Jenny comes in. We play 2 copies of Blazing Cartesia, the Virtues. Now Cartesia is basically a card that replaced the adult Vere, so you play that with a Magistus in order to get to a fusion card. Cartesia does the same thing without needing to play a fusion spell, so being able to fuse basically anything you want. She's a spellcaster, so you can use any WITCHCRAFTER to summon Vice Madame, and then when a fusion monster goes to the graveyard, you can get this back card during the end phase from your graveyard, and it doesn't have to be your own fusion monster. And with a format with so many tier element decks, your opponent is going to get a fusion monster in the graveyard regardless, so even if you don't have your own fusion monsters to leave the field or go to the grave, you're going to get this card back. So yeah, it's a really big replacement for the WITCHCRAFTER Vera Magistus monster, because you don't need to play the Magistus Invocation card, which can sometimes be a brick if you don't have a lot of monsters. And so yeah, this card is also a really good addition to the deck on top of all the support that it got in Magnificent Mavens. Mavens. Now, the only hand trap we play in the deck is 3 copies of Gamma with the 1 copy of Cyframe Driver. Now, you might have noticed that these cards tribute the summons for cost to summon from the deck, so this deck loses very, very easily to Ash Blossom. If your opponent ashes your monster, you're not going to be able to get another one on the field unless you have Holiday, which will be able to bring back another monster, and then you can use this effect again during your opponent's turn because they are fixed. But this is a very specific scenario that you need to have in your hand in order to be able to play around Ash Blossom, and your opponent is definitely going to Ash every single time they see one of your Witchcrafter effects. So this is why Gamma is a really, really good card in the deck, because you stop the Ash, you get your monster, and you also get Omega on field to get another interruption. Now let's move on to the juice of the deck. We play a lot of spell cards because these monsters need to discard spells in order to activate their effects, so we need to play a lot of them. So we play 3 copies of Witchcrafter Creation. This card adds a Witchcrafter monster from your deck to your hand, and all of the Witchcrafter spell cards have an effect that if you have not activated their first effect during this turn, if they're in the graveyard, you get to add them back to your hand during the end phase. So these cards, they're basically Sky Striker spells, but not as good, because you do get multiple effects, but you can only pick one of them during a single turn, and their effects are kind of mediocre compared to Sky Strikers. This is the only comparison I can think of that how the deck works, but again, it does have its niches over Sky Striker, and yeah, this card unfortunately can only search monsters. I wish it could search spells as well, but we can play with what we get. So yeah, this card is still a 3-off because you get to search your small monsters to go into your bigger ones, and you can also get it back if you have not activated the first effect. We play 3 copies of Witchcrafter Unveiling. This card is amazing, especially going second. Going first, it's really good as well because you can play around Ash Blossom. It's another way you can play around Ash, because what this card does is that you can special summon a Witchcrafter from your hand, and then your opponent is not going to be able to respond to your Witchcrafter monster effects for the duration of the turn. So this card not only plays around Ash Blossom, but going second, if your opponent has interruptions on the board, they have no choice but to negate this card. If they don't, then they're not going to be able to do anything when you activate your Spellcaster monster effects, so you're going to be able to not only get your big monsters on the board, but when you activate effects like Vera or Heine to destroy or negate their board, they will not be able to do anything about it. So yeah, this is a card that going second your opponent has to negate, otherwise they're going to be in a lot of trouble. We play 3 copies of Holiday. This is the Monster Reborn of the deck, and it's a card that you need to max out because you need to get to Vera and Heine as consistently as possible turn 1 on field, because the deck doesn't have a lot of interruptions. It's a deck that tries to outgrind your opponent with resources, but when it comes to the early game, if you want to survive that, you need to get both on the field, otherwise your opponent is going to be able to play through 1 interruption. But getting both on the field can sometimes be enough to stop your opponent, so getting the 1 on the field with Schmida and then maybe using Schmida's effect to dump the other one and then bring it back with Holiday, that's how you get both on. Another way, a new tool that we got that you can get more monsters on the field, is the 2 copies of Witchcrafter Confusion Confession. This is the fusion spell that we got in Magnificent Mavens, and we did get a fusion monster with it, and the fusion monster basically solves a lot of issues for the deck. We're going to talk about it once we get to the extra deck, but keep in mind that this fusion monster is so important that you also play Cartesia for it, which is something that you would not see other spellcaster fusion type of decks play, but this fusion monster you need to turbo out as fast as possible. You can consider playing a 3rd copy of Confusion, but again, you need 2 monsters in order to use this card, so it's technically a 3-card combo, so it's not something that is too consistent, but Cartesia replaces one of the materials because she's a spellcaster as well, so I feel like this way the engine becomes very, very consistent. For the 1-offs, we play 1 copy of Collaboration. This is a card that can help you push for game. Basically, choose a Witchcrafter monster and can make a 2nd attack during turn, and if it attacks, your opponent cannot activate any spell that drops till the end phase, and when you combine this with Vera, which boosts a spellcaster monster, you can get a lot of damage in. Play 1 copy of Draping. This is a card that's basically the back row removal of the deck. It spins back row back to your opponent's hand depending on how many Witchcraft monsters you control, and because of all the Witchcrafters same effect, you can get this back card back every single end phase that you have not used its effect, so you keep having access to it in case you're playing against the back row matchup. And when playing 1 copy of Buy Street, this is a card that is not the same as the other spells because it's a continuous spell, so instead of getting this card back to your hand, it's going to get placed face up on your field, and what it does is that it protects your Witchcrafter monsters to be destroyed once per turn from battle or card effect, and it has the effect that you can pitch it from your field to the graveyard instead of your hand if you were to activate a Witchcrafter monster effect. So yeah, this card gives you some protection that you need sometimes against distractions. For staples, we play 3 copies of Prosperity. It's very important to get access to what you need because sometimes you might open a handle of spells or a handle of monsters. If you're trying to go for the fusion monster, maybe you need the access to fusion spell or Cartesia. Yeah, this card gives you a lot. Even though you cannot activate Peter's effect the same turn you activate this card, it doesn't matter too much because this card is going to give you access to the card you need. We play 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talent. This is another card that even though it contradicts, the draw 2 effect contradicts with Prosperity, it doesn't matter too much because it has 2 other effects you can choose from. Usually you're going to be able to look at your opponent's hand after they ash you, and then if you have an extender and you can get Vera or Hein on the field, you've taken 2 cards out of their hand and basically get another interruption. So this card is really good into hand traps. Going second can give you resources or steal monsters, push for a game. Really amazing card. 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. This deck does struggle going second. It doesn't have the tools to break boards very easily, so you need cards like this in order to negate the effects. Once your opponent monsters do not have effects, then maybe it's much easier to deal with them because of cards like Collaboration, Heine to be able to attack multiple times or pop cards. So yeah, this card is really good. And again, even if you draw these spells going first, which they don't do anything, they are fodder for your Witchcrafter monsters because you'd need to discard spells in order to use their effects. So these cards are never going to be dead. And also one copy of Call by the Grave because again, I said that you lose to Ash very hard and Call by helps you deal with that, but also with Tier Laments, Ishizu being in the format and being basically tier 0, getting all the negation effect in the graveyard is very important no matter what deck like. Now let's get to the extra deck. Play 3 copies of the Infusion monster. We got Witchcrafter, Vice Madame. So this card needs a Witchcrafter monster and a Spellcaster monster, which is why I said Cartesia is a really good deck. And when a spell card or effect or a non-fusion Spellcaster monster effect is activated, as a quick effect, you can activate one of 3 effects. Either you can destroy a card in the field, you special summon level 6 or lower Witchcraft from your deck, or you add a Witchcrafter spell trap card from your graveyard to your hand. So what this card does is that every time you activate one of your spells or your Spellcaster monster effects, and it doesn't even have to be one of your own spells, even if your opponent activates a spell card, so you can use this effect during your own turn, during your opponent's turn, you basically either get to disrupt them, basically get to special summon a monster from the deck that is going to be able to use this effect because they are quick effects to summon monsters, so that's another way you can get both Vera and Heine field, or you can get back resources in case you need more cards in your hand, discard for Heine and Vera's Interruption. So this card, the longer it stays on the field, the more advantage you're going to get, and it's very easy to summon all 3 copies throughout the duel, so you definitely need to max it out because Confusion Confession gets itself back during the end phase. You play 2 copies of Cartesia, so you can summon this 3 times very easily, and it's a card that the more you get it on the field, then you're going to get so much advantage that your opponent is not going to be able to keep up. We play 1 copy of Omega because we do play Cypher Gear Gamma in the deck, and we can use this during our own turn because of all cost effects you have to summon the deck. And the Link monsters, you don't really summon them too often in this particular deck, but they're here just cause. So we play 1 copy of Anima. We do play Jenny, which is a level 1 monster, so in case your opponent places a monster under the extra monster zone, we can steal that monster. We play 1 copy of Artemis. Artemis is a card that can get used if you want to use the graveyard effects and you don't have a card in your hand to pitch, or you don't want to get a monster from the deck that you already have on the field. So if your opponent has something that you need to activate, for example, an Unveiling to get rid of, then you can summon your Jenny, link it away, and then you can use your Jenny's effect to copy any spell that you need in the graveyard, be able to get its effect off. We do play some of the Charmers because all of the Witchcrafter monsters are different attributes. So we play Hida because Schmidt is a fire monster, we play Area because Peter is a water monster, and we play Wind because Jenny is a wind monster. And these cards can help you extend into more monsters. We do play Nightmares for removal. We play 1 copy of Cerberus, 1 copy of Phoenix for back removal, and 1 copy of Unicorn. Unicorn is very easy to summon because, again, of the Charmer cards, you can get one of your opponent's monsters depending on the attribute, and then link climb this card. And then if you also have another extender and you want to go in for link 4, we do play those as well. Play 1 copy of Access Code Toker, which can help us seal games, 1 copy of Appaloosa if you want to get more interruption on the board, and we also play 1 copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World because the deck can sometimes struggle against an affected monster. It does have ways of getting rid of monsters like that because, again, Vera can boost all of your monsters depending on how many spells you have in your hand, but if you don't have that many spells, then you can potentially link climb into this card by getting all of your extenders like Holiday and Unveiling, and then you can link climb this card by getting rid of one of your opponent's monsters, and that's how you get rid of unaffected monsters if you can't run over. So yep, that's the deck, guys. Witchcrafters got a really huge boost. If you're a fan of the deck before, then you're going to love what the deck can do now, and I'm really excited about this deck. It's not a deck that you can do very well in like big events, but if you're playing at locals, then this deck can catch a lot of people off guard and be really fun. So if you're a fan of spellcasters and you want a deck that can amass a lot of advantage, then this is definitely the deck for you. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.